Okay, so we're doing a tour of the north of Israel with Or Sameach. The deal was that I said cheers, I got to go on the tour. And I said the north of Israel is extraordinarily beautiful. The essential ingredient, if you want a successful tour, is a successful tour guide. And we had the most fabulous guy. He's still a tour guide I discovered recently. He's called Chaim Saidor. And Chaim Saidor is one of these fellows who knows, he's from New York originally, knows every single pebble of Israel inside out. And he's got a whole battery of stories that brings every part of the journey to life. And I was really impressed. We were in Sipori. Recently we discovered Sipori, that's where Rebbe wrote the Mishnah. And we visited Rebbe's house, which was quite an exciting place to be. Well, I said to my friend Rabbi Kirsch, this fellow is extraordinary. His stories, he's really quite the raconteur. He said, oh, that's nothing. Get him to tell you his own story. And I said, what's his own story? He said, get him to tell you his own story. So as we went from Rebbe's house to the next part of the tour, I walked beside Chaim and I said to him, Chaim, I hear you've got an interesting story yourself. And he said, no, it's nothing. I said, come on, tell me this. Nothing. And then we came to the next bit and he went into his routine, his spiel. And then moving on to the next bit, I said, look, Chaim, tell me this story. Nothing. Eventually it came to lunch break, we got the sandwiches and I sat beside him and said, tell you what, Chaim, now you're going to tell me the story, huh? He said, look, it's no big deal. I said, look, Chaim, tell you what, I'll buy you a beer. And then you tell me the story. And he said, I don't like beer. I said, okay, I'll buy you a Coke, I'll get the beer, and then you'll tell me the story. And again he said no. I said, look, Chaim, I'm a rabbi. My business is stories. You've no right to keep this story from me. So with that guilt trip, I managed to get him to tell me his story. So he was born in somewhere in New York, I can't remember where anymore, to a completely, technically reform family. And he went to university and gave his parents maximum nachos. He got his degree. Good Jewish parents, boy with his degree, fun. Then after getting his degree, he actually went further in the nachos scale and added, instead of the letters BA after his name, he now had IFB attached to the end of his name, which totally thrilled his parents to pieces. You know what IFB stands for?
IFB?
Mm-hmm. No. In the family business. He went into the family business, and they had a couple of stores that were open 24/7 throughout the name. Well, more than a couple, throughout the New York area. And he managed one of these stores. He said to me, I should have got the message the second time I was looking down the barrel of a gun. I should have got the message the second time I was looking down the barrel of a gun. He's in the store in the wee small hours of the morning. Two black guys come into the store. They have a problem, drugs. He has a solution, the contents of the cash register. They stick the gun in his face. He very wisely hands over the contents of the cash register. And then one night, two white guys come into the store, whom he knew from the neighborhood. And by some trick, I can't remember the details, they managed him to go into the basement of the store to get something, and they followed him into the basement. And there they attacked him with knives. They slashed him 37 times. They stabbed him 16 times, managing to miss every major organ except his lungs. They stabbed him in both lungs. He fought his way into a downstairs restroom, slammed the toilet door and bolted it, and they tried to beat it down, but they couldn't. He collapsed onto the toilet seat, the blood's pouring from all these wounds. And he knew he was going to die, so he said, and again, I'm telling the stories, he told it to me, he said, I took this finger and he dipped it into the blood that was spurting out his chest, and he wrote their names on the wall, because if he's going to die, at least the guy should be caught. It went quiet outside, and somehow he knew, although from his background I don't know how he knew, that a Jew should, if a Jew can, say Shema before he or she dies. So sitting in the toilet seat, he said Shema. I guess all he knew was Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, but he said that. It's still quiet outside. So he plucked up his courage, pulled back the bolts, opened the door, and the two guys had fled. They'd run upstairs. They probably thought he was dead anyway. He staggered across the floor of the basement, got to the emergency fire exit, which he had not been able to open when they were attacking him, opened it, staggered one block down the street to where they knew there was an all-night cinema. He came into the foyer, collapsed in the foyer. The little ticket lady rushed out from her booth. He said his name and gave his father's phone number. She dialed 911, and he was rushed to the nearest hospital, because of course they have to take it to the nearest hospital, which is a public hospital, and apparently a pretty bad place. In the emergency room, the doctor working there said there was nothing they could do. The police were delighted, because in New York state law, the statement of a dying man is irrefutable in court. So he's lying in the gurney, and they get his statement, and off they go. His father phoned the emergency room, spoke to the emergency doctor. The doctor said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Saidor, your son is dead." When the father arrived 20 minutes later with some local rabbi to pick up the body of the dead son, he discovered his son was not dead, nearly dead, but not dead. And so, and again, I'm telling the story the way he told it to me. He and the rabbi ran around the hospital for half an hour, and they managed to persuade 2 junior Jewish doctors to take on the case. And they fought for 9 hours, and they saved his life. After that, Chaim was told it would take him 6 months to get out of hospital. He was very seriously, 16 stab wounds and 13 slashes is quite, the trauma, if nothing else. However, apparently it was a very horrible place, and he wanted to get out as soon as he possibly could. He didn't want to wait the 6 months that they said it would take. So he wanted to discharge himself. Now, you can discharge yourself from hospital, but in New York, apparently, here's an interesting law, to be able to sign the discharge papers, you have to be standing. You have to be able to stand your own 2 feet to sign the papers. Somehow he pulled himself after 2 weeks to his feet, signed the discharge papers, and off he went. And he recovered at home, and indeed it took him 6 months before he was able to function properly. When he wanted to get out of New York. New York had such terrible memories, shocking associations. And so he just started to travel around the United States of America, staying in little places, getting part-time jobs, full-time jobs for a little while, then moving on. He ended up in Las Vegas, being a croupier, dealing cards in blackjack, one of these games. And eventually he moved to one of the states in the south, where I was a few hours ago. And there, I can't remember the name of the town. I've got a memory it was called White something or other, because he said it was white by name and white by nature. There was almost no Jews living in the town, 2 actually, 2 Jews, and almost no blacks, which of course is very, very unusual, particularly in the southern states. But he said it was as different to New York as you could find in the United States, and that was very therapeutic, and he liked it. The people were very friendly, and he became friendly with the 2 Jews, and that was fine. On the outskirts of the town, there was a large university, and this was the mid-70s, and the university, very keen to establish its credentials as a tolerant, liberal, white university, acceded to the request of the Black Student Caucus that an invitation which they'd issued to a famous civil rights activist of those days by the name of Stokely Carmichael. You ever heard of Stokely Carmichael? He was a friend of Malcolm X's. That he should come and speak to the university. And so they wanted to show they were very tolerant, so they okayed that request. And he heard that this great hero of the civil rights movement was coming, and he and his Jewish friend went to the auditorium of the university to hear this great guy. And all the black students were sitting at the front. They were kvelling. And on the stage there was all the professors and the vice chancellor, and left inside the stage was Stokely Carmichael and his entourage. And so eventually there was thousands and thousands of people there. And the MC calls for silence and invites the vice chancellor to address them. He comes over in his gown and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a privilege for us here today to have with us one of the great heroes of the civil rights movement. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Stokely Carmichael." And so everybody stands up, massive applause, and Stokely Carmichael approaches the lectern and motions everybody to sit down and waits for total and complete silence, and then began his lecture. And he started off by saying, "The problem with America today is the Jews. The Jews control the economy. The Jews control the media. The Jews control the banks. The Jews have too much power. And my friend Chaim Saidar said that he looked around to see the reaction of the tolerant, liberal white Americans to this massive spewing force of race hatred from the anti-racist activist, to find that every single person was on their feet giving him a standing ovation. After that, Chaim Saidar felt that the United States of America was no longer the place for him. And so he flew back to New York, and he wanted to move and live in Israel, and he wanted to move to Israel tomorrow, the next day. So in the mid-1970s, if you wanted to go and settle in Israel the next day, where would you go? Kibbutz! Go to be kibbutz. So the Jewish agency, sorry? Maybe Hayas. The Jewish agency in New York had a kibbutz office. They were looking for mitnadvim. They were looking for volunteers to work in kibbutzim, and they recruited people. And so he went there, and he gets an interview with a guy, an Israeli guy who listens to the story with great sympathy, and he explains he just wants to go there. The guy says, Chaim, in Baya. Chaim, you book yourself the ticket tomorrow. You go from JFK through to Tel Aviv. You stay in a hotel, you go to our office in Tel Aviv the next day. Here's the address and the card. You make the appointment, no problem, in Baya. Chaim said, when I need references, Chaim, Shamati, you don't need no references. Chaim, book the ticket, go home. So Chaim stays in the hotel, and he goes to tickets, and he goes to the flight next day to JFK, he stays in the hotel in Tel Aviv, and he goes to the office, and he shows the ticket, the card he's been given, and he gets an appointment with the guy there, and the guy interviews him and says, and where's your references? He says, your colleague in New York said I would mean any references. So he reacted the way all Israelis react faced with crises like this. You've seen that one. And now he was stuck. And so, but he'd been to Israel before, he knew of some kibbutz. I mean, he obviously had gumption and backbone. He simply turned up at various kibbutzim when he sort of knocked on the door and he says he wants to join. So whoever was in charge of interviewing such people said, where's your references? No references. But he had an aunt, and the aunt had that essential ingredient for succeeding in Israel, which of course is called vitamin P. Are you familiar with vitamin P? Protects you. You need to have somebody in the inside track who's going to sort of like look after you. And so he approached the aunt, and the aunt made a phone call to a kibbutz which she knew people in. And the kibbutz movement is a very wide spectrum. You've got kibbutz Haredi and kibbutz Sadati, and at the other end of the spectrum you've got kibbutz anti-Dati. And his aunt knew some people in a kibbutz from a movement called Heshama HaTzeir, which, as he explained it to me, the founders of the kibbutz, the grandparents, were communists who came from Russia who thought Stalin was too left-wing, too right-wing rather. And so he was interviewed, which included handwriting analysis, psychological evaluation, but they let him in. And he became a probationary member of the kibbutz. They assign you a family who are your people who look after you, and you go for meals and stuff. And after 6 months, Chaim Saidar joined the Israeli army. And now the terrible memories of the attack that he'd suffered in New York, the 16 stab wounds and the 17 slash wounds, were fading fast. He's now got a new country, a new language, a new uniform, and that was that. It came to Erev Yom Kippur. The Israeli army tries to let as many of the soldiers home for Yom Kippur as possible, and this new recruit was allowed to go back to his new family, the kibbutz family, Erev Yom Kippur. And when he arrived back, he discovered that Yom Kippur is his special chag, and this particular kibbutz is the chag of basar levan, the cottage cheese, pork and cottage cheese. And Chaim said it was actually so very sad, because you see, this was a statement of the founders of the kibbutz, the grandparents and great-grandparents of the current generation. This was their statement to God in Yom Kippur. Pork and cheese together. Take that, God, that we don't really believe in, but you get the idea. He said it was so sad because the current generation, they didn't know why they were eating cottage cheese and pork on Yom Kippur, because they didn't know what Yom Kippur was. But Chaim said that a thought came into his mind, why everything that happened to me had happened to me. Of course, that's the question we all ask. But one thing he said, I know for certain, or he said to himself, I know for certain, I didn't go through all of that and come all the way to Israel to give all up, become a non-Jew, become a goy. Anyway, he had a friend who'd started a yeshiva called Or Sameach, which in those days was an apartment building in Jerusalem. I'd been trying to persuade him to come to Or Sameach, which he'd been refusing to do very vehemently. But now he went. He spent a Shabbos there, and he liked it. He stayed for a week, and then he stayed for 2 weeks, and now he's officially AWOL from the Israeli Army. He reappears in the Israeli Army, his base, 3 months later, and now he's got a yarmulke and tzitzis. So they gave him a dishonorable discharge because he was clearly mentally ill. But his question was ultimately an inevitable question, which is why, when things go wrong, we want to know why, and we certainly want to know why me. And of course, that's what we just read about a couple of weeks ago. That's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem when he's set off on the mission. Hashem has set him to go to Paray. Things get much worse. V'yoshev Moshe el Hashem v'yoma Hashem lama hariyos lama zeh. Why have you done bad to the Jewish people? Lama zeh shalachthani. Why did you send me? Me'oz bosi al paro labar b'shmecha. And from the moment I came to speak in your name, as he told me to do, Herald Amazeh, it's bad for the Jewish people. You've not saved your people. V'yom Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe, Atasira. Now you'll see. Atasira. Here is the quintessential human response to suffering. Why? Lam hariyos lam hazeh. Why? And here's Hashem's response. See, you got to watch out for that in Israel, and there's that other one as well. Wait and see. Right? We want to know why, and we want to know why now. Hashem says wait. Sometimes you have to wait a long time when things go very wrong in life. You have to wait a long time. There is, the cliche of how many times have you heard people say, or maybe even said yourself, at the time I thought it was the worst possible thing that could happen. But now, sometimes you have to wait to see. And there's a famous Maimon Chazal that Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Har Sinai to get the Torah, and he says Hashem is Borach, and he's wearing tefillin. And he sees the knot at the back of Hashem's head. Now, of course, the problem with that clearly is, I'm going to close that door so that will not trigger the noisy air conditioning. Hopefully. Good. So the question, obviously, with this is, what does it mean he shows them a picture of Hashem wearing tefillin? To wear tefillin, you need two things. You need tefillin, and you need a head. And Hashem clearly doesn't have any of those two things. What it is a message to him, to let him see something. But the bit of the tefillin that Moshe saw was the knot at the back. And the Biala Rebbe says that the message was, you see Hashem looking back the way. At the time, you don't see it. But moving forward, then you get a perspective, then you see it. But at the time, you don't see it. So here is the absolute human condition expressed when they're suffering. Why? Hashem says, wait. Sometimes you have to wait a long time. Did anybody here get any British or English family connections at all? In the lead up to the Second World War, there were lots and lots and lots of Jews who managed to escape the Nazis. Czech Jews and German Jews and Austrian Jews. Sorry?
Kinder transport.
Yes, the Kinder, but there was adults as well before we got to them, including members of my family. So they managed to get to the UK. There was, incidentally, as the famous author of Animal Farm in 1984, George Orwell, who was a writer, was superb. George Orwell writes there was almost as much anti-Semitism in the UK, in England, before the Second World War as there was in Germany. Jewish refugees were known by the pejorative refugees. Not a lot of sympathy if you're a refugee maybe. Anyway, so when the war broke out, the British rounded up many of the Jewish refugees because they were technically enemy aliens. They carried German, Austrian or Czech passports. I mean, Jews, but it certainly the justification was that they could the Nazis might have insinuated some spies amongst the Jews, which were possible, but probably just anti-Semitism. Anyway, they were put in a temporary internment camp in a place called the Isle of Man, which is just north of Liverpool, on the west coast of England. And then they had to decide what they were going to do with them. And they came up with the traditional English solution for getting rid of people that you don't want to be in your country, which is to send them to where? Australia, mate. How are they going to get them there? If you remember that bit of history, the Germans' tactics, as Britain is an island, was to simply sink all the merchant ships bringing all the supplies and strangle England into submission. So they had U-boat packs that were sinking all the ships. And how are you getting a ship to take the people to Australia? So they found a ship, it's called the Dunera. The next problem was finding a crew, because all the British ships are being sunk with great frequency. A lot of sailors are being drowned. Where are you going to find them? And somebody had an Einfall, a wonderful idea. We'll go to the prisons and we'll offer qualified merchant seamen an amnesty if they're willing to man the ship and take it to Australia. So unsurprisingly, they found lots of volunteers. The Jews were shipped to the south of England and put onto the Dunera, and the Dunera set sail, and 4 days, if I remember correctly, into the cruise, the crew rioted. They attacked the Jews. They beat them up badly. They stripped them of any valuables they still had. Rings were torn from fingers. If ladies had bracelets, they were ripped from their wrists, their necklaces, etc. That all the Jews' possessions, their meager things they'd been able to take with them, were ransacked. The suitcases, were thrown overboard. And then eventually, the ship weeks later arrived in Australia. I think it's very easy for us to imagine or picture in our mind if we were one of those Jews stepping off that ship and saying, in the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, Lama Hari Oisalam Azeh. It's not bad enough that I lost my home, I lost my country, I lost my business, and in some cases lost my family. I said I had a relative around the corner. He managed to pretend to be a qualified carpenter. Oh, incidentally, the British would only take refugees if they had a skill which they could use. It was not a philanthropic exercise. He pretended to be a carpenter. He was a travelling salesman. And he managed to get British citizenship. He was in the British, it's called the Home Office in London, filling in the papers to have his wife and 6-year-old son join him the day that England declared war in Germany, and he never saw them again. So they've lost everything. But I had to lose my father's wedding ring on my mother's necklace, my last remaining things. Lama Re'ois Lama Zeh. Again, we want to know why when we're in pain. And Hashem says, wait and see. This particular occasion, it took, if I remember rightly, 30-something years, maybe 40 years, to find the answer. There was a fellow who was going through a flea market in Amsterdam, and he found a book. It was a leather-bound book, and actually turned out to be the diary of a U-boat captain, so he bought it. It was translated. It became an important historical document. And in it, the U-boat captain recorded that one day he was patrolling off the coast of Spain. He put up his periscope, and he sees in front of him a merchant ship. And of course, being German, every detail was recorded. The name of the ship was the Dunera, the ship in which the Jews were taken to Australia. He rotated his periscope through 360 degrees to make sure there was no escorting battleships to protect it. There was nothing. And then it's as easy as a fat, juicy target. And how it works is you just change the angle of the boat to be facing towards the Dunera, and you put in a torpedo. You take the periscope down because it's making white foam in the top, and any patrolling ships could bomb you. And you just work out through trigonometry how long it's going to take you to, and then you set the stopwatch to take 20 seconds. And they're waiting for the boom. There was no boom. And so he puts up the periscope to see that the torpedo had missed by inches, just missed the propeller. You can see that the Dunera is sailing on utterly unaware it's under attack. So he changes the angle of the boat, he's about to shut fire again, and he saw something that stopped him. Because bobbing up and down on top of the waves was the sort of refuse and flotsam and jetsam that he normally saw after he had sunk a ship. There it was, bobbing up and down when he hadn't sunk the ship. So he ordered the U-boat to the surface. Some of the sailors quickly pulled in some of these suitcases. They took them downstairs. The captain opened them, and when he looked inside, he said, "My God, my God." See, German Jews read German books, Kant and Goethe and Schiller and all the rest. And when he saw that these cases had been thrown overboard because there was no value to the sailors, were clearly belonged to Germans, they assumed it was the possessions of German POWs, and that this ship was full of German prisoners of war that the British were taking to Australia. So he radioed to the German Admiralty in Bremerhaven, received new instructions to escort the Dunera on his journey to Australia, signalling to other Axis ships, warning them that it's full of German POWs and not to attack. And when it arrived in Australia, these Jews got off, and I'm sure many of them would have said, La Mariosa, La Mazin. The crew was given a week's shore leave, the ship was refueled, restocked, and set sail to go back to England. And German spies who'd been watching through the binoculars to find how many German POWs were being taken there discovered it was full of Jews. And that was reported back to the German Admiralty. And when the Dunera turned round, then this cruel and vicious crew who had beaten up, including bayoneting one of the Jews on board, was torpedoed, and this time they didn't miss. But again, we want the answer, and we want to know why now. And sometimes it takes a very, very long while. I remember.
How do you take it that it was necessary for them to get beaten up? If a wind could have taken their super...
We're gonna get to the depth of Hashkaka practice of Claudius next week. Why one thing happens to one person. And we're going to talk about this a little bit as well, but we'll get to this is more of an introduction, I suppose. This is the sketch. We'll fill in the details next week. It'll be more Lomdish. However, we'll touch on that very shortly as well. I remember when I was in Amsterdam once, one of my ex-Talmudim was getting married, and I was sitting there, and there was a rabbi's table, and in came a fellow who I hadn't seen for a very long time. We'd been in Gateshead Yeshiva together, and this was 10 years afterwards, I think. Anyway, so basically, in came this fellow, and you know what it's like. He was originally from Sweden. Let's call him Shmuel. His real name is Chaim, but we'll call him Shmuel. Anyway, so basically, he came in, and you know, he hadn't seen somebody for a long time. I said, well, wow. And we sat down, we started to schmooze. And he said, you know, I have big tiners against Gateshead Yeshiva. Big complaints. And I said, what's your complaints? He said, why didn't they warn us and prepare us for what happens after Yeshiva? So he'd gone to learn in Keul in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a city with a long history of treating their rabbis in a challenging manner. Said he's looking for a diplomatic phrase. And he'd gone there, he thought it was very good. He was going to go there, he was going to do something, you know, nice and noble, because it was sort of kollel, it would be an outreach kollel, and people would appreciate that. I mean, after all, he could have become a dentist, an accountant, or something Jewish. Instead of that, you know, a rabbi and a kollel. Anyway, instead of finding that people were welcoming his noble choice, many of the people hated him and his colleagues for having invaded their town, including, ironically, a couple of the rabbis of the town who once upon a time had been in Gateshead Yeshiva or the equivalent. And he said, why didn't they prepare us for what happens after Yeshiva? I said to him, you know, Chaim, I used to have the same reaction as you, but only for a few moments. Because when I went from Liverpool from Gateshead to Liverpool Keul, I also thought I was going to go and do a noble thing and help a community. And I was going to be, in my incredible modest way, I was going to be incredibly successful. And I went there, and Baruch Hashem had tremendous yad and I was very successful. And a lot of people hated my guts for it, including at least one or two rabbis who once upon a time had been in Gateshead Yeshiva. And for a few seconds, just like you, I said to him, I felt, you know, why didn't they prepare us for what came next? And then I said to myself, Yehudi Yoina, in your 7 years in Gateshead Yeshiva, did you never once go to a Chumash shiur? Did you never go to a Mussar shmuz or a Hashkafa shiur? Did Avram Avinu have an easy life? No, I don't think so. Yitzchak, Yaakov's got a brother who's fighting with him in the womb. And then he's born, the brother's fighting with him again, tries to kill him. And then his mother says you've got to pretend to be a brother and steal his blessing, which of course pleases his brother so much he tries to kill him again. And then he runs away to get a bride and to flee from the brother, as his parents have told him to do. And he ends up with the wrong girl. And not only does he end up with the wrong girl, he has to work more to get the right girl, and inherits at the same time the father-in-law from hell, who cheats him and swindles him a gazillion times. And then, of course, everything settles down because Hashem said it's now time to flee. So he and his 4 wives now head to Eretz Yisrael. His father-in-law tries to catch up with him, tries to kill him again, but Hashem protects him from that one. Baruch Hashem, they get to Eretz Yisrael. Everything's good except his daughter is kidnapped and raped and then held a prisoner. And then his sons go and kill all the people in Shechem. in anger, which doesn't please him, because he's scared that the whole country will rise up against him. But Baruch Hashem, to get through that, and then he loses the Yosef, and then he goes blind, and he loses Nevi'us. Did Yaakov have an easy life? The problem was that when I was in Gates of Yeshiva, I learned this stuff, and I think I was really quite good at that sort of stuff. And particularly, it was good at seeing that when you're invited to a bocher to somebody's table Friday night. Might get a nice good shidduch out of this one. I was thinking a nice Devar Torah. It's just I never thought it was talking to me. I never thought it was talking to Y.Y. Rubenstein in whenever that was, mid 1970s. I thought it was Avram, and I thought it was Yitzchak or Sarah and Mikor. The Torah is talking to us. Just I never got it. So, what does he mean? Why didn't they prepare us? Of course they prepared you. You just didn't think it was talking to you. You missed the fundamental for years and years. It's Rubenstein is talking to, it's Cohen, it's Levy, it's the 1970s, 1980s, 2019. It's talking to us now. And Rav Shamshon Phil Hirsch, he asks a tremendously interesting question. Of course, all rabbinic, not all, but many rabbinic questions usually start with what is really, it's a trick question. This one's not a trick question. And this is how it goes. In the beginning of Seder Vayechi, Vayikru v'yimei Yisrael l'mus v'yikpar l'benay Yosef v'yamar la'im noam v'tzasichem v'nechel. If I'm going to find favor in your eyes, don't let me be buried in Mitzrayim. But the beginning of the Seder says, Vayehi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheba esra shana. Yaakov was in Eretz Mitzrayim for 17 years. And Vayehi Yimei Yaakov, but the entirety of his life was Shnei Chayav. His life was Sheva Shanim Barbon Meir Shana 140. So Shamshon Phil Hirsch asked the question, which is not a trick question. What was the best part of Yaakov Avinu's life? The first 130 years, or the last 17 years, when he finds that Yosef's alive and he's the king of Egypt, and there's a sort of like inward of Egypt, everything you could need, of 5 towns of Egypt. There's Seasons Express and yeshivas for the kids, and everything's perfect, right? And he's reunited, he gets Nevi'us back again. So what was the best part of his life? The first 130 years or the last 17 years? Gentlemen, what would you say? It's not a trick question.
I'm going to go on the one here and say the last 13 years. 7.
Last 17 years. You are quite right, of course. I think the American expression is duh, right? Of course. But, says Rav Shamshon Phil Hirsch, in which part of his life did he achieve greatness? In which part of his life did he achieve such greatness that Hashem says to him that the name Yaakov is no longer sufficient to call you by? You have to be called Yisrael. In the difficult times, not the easy times, in the difficult times. I once heard when I was driving in South Africa to say a shir given by somebody called Rebbetzin Tzipora Heller of Neve Yerushalayim and now she's got her own seminary. It was one of the most brilliant, I think most brilliant woman I've ever come across. Exceptionally nice person too. It's very embarrassing when a woman knows more of its foreign than most rabbis. But we pretend we're not troubled by it. Oh, that's nice. Anyway, but Tzipora Heller once quoted the Rambam. I've asked her where this is many times. I think it's more in Nevuchim, I can't remember where. But anyway, the Rambam talks about 4 levels of suffering. 4 levels of suffering. The first level of suffering, the Rambam says, is material suffering. Somebody was extremely rich and loses it all overnight. Okay? The second level of suffering, says the Rambam, is health. You were healthy and vibrant and strong, and then suddenly you have, God forbid, a stroke or a major heart attack or a diagnosis of some catastrophic other condition, and you're not that healthy man anymore. And obviously that's much worse than losing money. The next level of suffering is worse than that. It's called vicarious suffering. Vicarious suffering is when you suffer for somebody else. And as I said to you, the Shabbos, as I'm going to Camp Simcha with a whole bunch of parents with very, very seriously sick kids. If you've ever been involved with somebody you love, could be a parent, and God forbid a child is very seriously ill, and you know that my late wife, Aleh Shalom, said to me many times, this is much worse for you than it is for me. Which was not true, but it certainly was tough. So, and that's certainly much worse. And I remember when we used to go to the cancer hospital in Manchester for our treatments, no matter how bad it was, when we used to park, if there was any parking available, we used to park and had to go past a building which had the sign in jolly, colourful letters, young oncology unit, then it really put our problems into perspective. And the fourth level of suffering, the Rambam says, I mean, so you get it, money, losing all your money, losing your health, God forbid. Suffering for somebody else has lost their health. And even worse, says the Rambam, no suffering. No suffering. So when she was saying this shir, she played the game with her audience, and it's quite good, fun to do. She said, I want you to imagine somebody who was extremely wealthy and loses it all overnight. What negative reactions could that have? How could that impact negatively on somebody who was mega rich and then loses all the money?
Anger.
Anger, yes, very good. Anger with whom? Yeah, that's cool. He always takes the rap, okay. You could be angry with God because he made you invest with Bernie Madoff, didn't he? Yeah, it's entirely his fault. It was anger with God. You can be angry with yourself for being an idiot for investing with Bernie Madoff as well, but certainly anger. Anything else?
Frustration.
Yeah, frustration. Let's move frustration up a couple of notches. What do we find? Depression. Suicide. When the famous financial crash in the 1920s, then people literally threw themselves off out of the buildings in Wall Street and stuff, which is really outside Sherman Wall Street. The windows not open. They were fixed closed because people threw themselves out. Right? So it can be anger with God, depression, loss of hope, a whole ton of things. It can be suicide for losing all your money. Give me a positive reaction to losing your money. This is when it becomes challenging. Give me a positive reaction to losing all your money. Yeah, you can be philosophical about it. Yeah, Gamzo Tova. Yeah. Anything else? My youngest son was very friendly with the youngest son of the richest Jew in England when I left 8 years ago. His personal portfolio was £1 billion, which I suppose these days is probably not a lot of money. But anyway, basically his son said to my son, I don't know who my friends are. Because you never know if you're very rich, whether people like you because you're you or because you're very rich. So you get to know, who your real friends are. As the famous philosophers from Liverpool, the Fab Four, once said, the best things in life are free. Maybe it would be a humbling thing in a very good way. I remember the first time I flew first class, which sadly, tomorrow morning I will not be flying first class to London, but when I did this from South Africa, it was first class. It's rather good. And let me give you a piece of advice here. Never, ever fly first class. Ever. Unless you can afford to do it all the time, never fly first class. But you can become extremely disconnected from other people and their real worries when you're living that sort of lifestyle. Maybe that will put you in touch with all sorts of folk. So a whole lot of negative reactions you could have to losing your money and a whole lot of positive reactions. Which way will it go? Who will choose which way it goes?
Without dropping any names, though, there are plenty of
Philanthropists?
Yes. Rich Jews that share their wealth.
Oh, absolutely.
Millions and millions of dollars, which is, I guess, the best case scenario.
100%. Yeah, that's the best case scenario. I mean, if you've ever dealt, as a rabbi, I have dealt many times with extremely wealthy people. Sort of like popped along for advice. The worst thing of all is inherited wealth. There was a story of I don't know who it was, in Brooklyn, some great tzedekahs. She was on her deathbed and she was surrounded by her family. And they asked her, she only had minutes to go, and they said, Bobby, give us a bracha. And she didn't hesitate. She said, you should never be rich. Now, she didn't say you should be poor. You should never be rich. Somewhere in the middle is a healthy place to be. But inheriting it, deadly. Absolutely deadly. Bill Gates is leaving $5 million to each of his kids. They could leave $5 billion, they can 20 billion. He's leaving them, I believe he's giving them either 20 or 50 billion to distribute and give away during the course of their lifetime. They've got to give away. He doesn't want, to keep the money. But he knows, when he was interviewed, he said it would not be good for the world and certainly not good for them to have all this money. If you start and you build yourself up from a garage in California, whatever it was, Seattle, wherever he started, and then you become Bill Gates, that's one thing. But if you inherit Bill Gates and you've done nothing, it's just going to kill you. So a whole lot of negative choices, a whole lot of positive choices. Who chooses which way it goes? You do. Now imagine somebody who's extremely healthy, and then he loses health catastrophically overnight. Negative choices, negative reactions to that? Well, the same as before. Anger. Anger with God. He's always going to get the blame. Angry with yourself, particularly if you made stupid life choices, right? As the doctor says, you get lung cancer and you're a heavy smoker, you've got to be angry with yourself, I think. Then you're going to be, the depression, fear, anxiety. Is that twinge another heart attack? It's just the same as before, really. Just a little up a notch. Positive reactions to losing your health. That one sounds very strange. Positive reactions to losing your health. I remember when my late wife was first diagnosed with cancer, I was walking home from shul. The community I live in there is very similar to our community here. It's a young community. Well, I was younger as well, but I was sort of mid-range. And there was a young fellow. He was having an argument with his wife. I was walking past him in the doorway of his house, and he had a baby in his arms. He was shouting at her, and she was shouting back. I didn't know what it was about. But I remember thinking as I walked past, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And if you've ever been involved with serious illness, either, God forbid, yourself or somebody you're very close to, you'll know that you see the world radically different. It's almost as though there's a glass, you're in a glass jar, or the world is, and you're either looking at them, but there's a big barrier. And I would honestly estimate that 85, maybe 90% of the stuff that we concern ourselves with, worry about, strive for, is total rubbish. It's total garbage. Did you get the latest watch, or the latest car, or the latest this, or the latest... Because new is such a big word. It's just total and utter rubbish.
That could happen either way, though. Leaving the hospital with a newborn baby, or leaving the hospital after losing a loved one. You both think, why is everyone driving and going places? You could have that same epiphany.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So you're gonna... You
don't need the devastation to bring you there.
You have to have a certain mindset to take that on board. That would be very great. I mean, if you're going to get there without that, as we'll see shortly, then that'd be wonderful. Then you would need that. Very often.
We've all had those epiphanies when wedding day or
oh yeah, it can be.
It's like, why is the world? It's alcohol.
Yeah.
This is what matters. Yeah.
So it can be that you lose your health. It can be an incredibly devastating thing, or an incredibly building thing. There was a guy called Dr. Rubenstein, I was told, I think in the Boston area. A woman had a heart attack, and she came in, and he was looking after her, and he went home, and the next day he was coming back, and was approaching her room, and there's people rushing in with a crash cart, and they're sticking, defibrillators in their chest, and by the time he got there, they switched everything off. What happened? Massive heart attack, he tried this, he tried that. Let me try. So he switches the defibrillator back on, puts the paddles in the chest, the body jumps up, a gazillion volts, whatever they do. Nothing, flatlined. More flatline. Nothing. He was going to give up. One more time, suddenly, beep, 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 beep. So went to visit her the next day, and she was sitting up in bed with her husband. Her husband leapt up from beside the bed, and he said, "That's him. That's the doctor who wouldn't give up." And she said, "I'm not going to thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. I'm not going to thank you. But when I get home and I wake up in my own bed for the first time, I'm going to say, thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. When I take my little girl in my arms for the first time, I'm going to say, thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. And when I'm well enough to do the school run and carpool and take the kids, I'm going to say, thank you, Dr. Rubenstein. And sometimes it takes that sort of thing for you to see and appreciate So it can be a whole lot of negative reactions to losing your health, a whole lot of positive. Who chooses? You choose. Then you get to the devastating one about seeing somebody else you love in real pain. Make a parents to child, which is where I'm going this Shabbos. Negative reactions to that? Well, that's all the stuff we said about before, but it's just much, much worse. Much, much worse. And it can even be much more dramatic. Negative reactions to having a very sick kid, and I've seen this many times as well. You might reject the kid. Particularly if it's not a physical complaint, but it might be a psychological or an intellectual. If the child's born a Down syndrome kid or autistic and stuff like that. It's not unheard of for parents, including frum parents, to simply dispose of the kid for some Catholics to bring up. You might reject the kid. You might reject each other. If the reason that you've got a sick kid is because your wife carries a flaw in her gene, or the husband carries it, then you might think to yourself, if it wasn't for him or her, I would have a normal family. Positive reactions. It might bring you closer to that child than any other child would possibly be. To his parents or them to him. It might bring you closer as a couple than any couple could possibly be. And it goes without saying that very often the money that's supplied by trusts and people to find cures for childhood illnesses is almost always supplied by parents who themselves have gone through the same childhood illness for their kids. It's a whole lot of positives and a whole lot of negative, and who chooses? You choose. You either become better or bitter. And the difference between the two is I. Better or bitter, and the difference is I. And what about the worst one? The Rambam says the worst one, no suffering. And the answer to that one really is, that enigmatic statement, is because all of us are born with certain strengths and certain weaknesses as human beings. We're sent here in order to cultivate the strengths and to diminish, and if you can, eradicate the weaknesses. Sometimes a person, and you were generally helped and encouraged to do that, encouraged by your parents, encouraged by your family, your friends, your shul, your school, your yeshiva, and everything in order to become a better person. But some people just can't. Some people remain totally focused on themselves as opposed to anybody else in the world and do a lot of damage. And if a person is not able to generate change from within, then it might be that Hashem will give them a little nudge. Might be that Hashem will give them a nudge and help them to generate change from without. You might go through a period of financial instability, which we all agreed you could turn into a positive thing. It might be that you'll go through a health scare, which you could choose to be good. It might be that you need a more radical treatment and you get somebody you love is in trouble for you to change. But it could be, as far as heaven's concerned, that they can see that under no circumstances this guy's going to change. So what's the point in giving him pain or suffering? God doesn't do it just for fun. If he's not going to change under any circumstances, have a life that's free of any worries, although I've never found anybody who's ever had such an existence. But chiefly free from any worries, because you're not going to change. Send along a score of angels, sit at the foot of his bed and say, change, yeah, get lost, get out of here. We're not changing. Yeah. I was once in San Diego, and there's two Orthodox shows in San Diego. A small one and the big one. I was in the small one, the rabbi called Rabbi Bugopolsky, which is a really good name, Bugopolsky. And do you ever see a face that you just immediately fall in love with? Not talking romantically, you just like. There was an old guy. I was sort of sitting in the rabbi's seat at the front, the guest rabbi, and then there's sort of like pews, rows of seats. And there was an old guy there, he was 80s. This gorgeous smile. And he looked 80, he was all wrinkled and 80-ish. But he sparkly blue eyes and a gorgeous smile. Anyway, so when you do a Shabbaton, like the one I'm off to, they usually supply the organization of the rabbi with a bunch of titles, and he chooses the one that fits best. So he wanted this talk for the next day. So I gave this talk just as we have, and then afterwards we went in for a meal. There was about 200, 300, I can't remember exactly, 300 maybe people sitting there. And this old guy came up to me and said, Rabbi Rubinstein, I want you to know that everything you said about suffering was 100% correct. I was in 14 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, which is very good. This, and he held up his hand, and these 3 fingers been chopped off, and an SS man forced his hand into a chopping machine. And we chatted a little bit more, and off he went. And another guy came up, and the other guy, he had more of an American accent. He lived in Detroit. He spends his winters in San Diego, which has got like perfect climate. And he said, Rabbi Rubinstein, I'm supposed to be speaking this afternoon as the Shlishis. You've taken away everything I wanted to say. I was in Auschwitz. But I wanted to hear what an Auschwitz survivor would have to say on the subject of suffering. So he said the following thing. He said, so again, everybody come to hear him, 300 people. Later that afternoon, he said, one day, a bunch of us boys were standing in a corner of the barracks within sight of the chimneys of the crematoria. And one of the guys says, I'm happy I'm in Auschwitz. He said, what? said, I'm happy I'm in Auschwitz. I said, you're happy you're in Auschwitz? You're crazy, you're sick, you're Meshuggah. I said, nah, I'm not Meshuggah. And if I wasn't happy, so why should I be? Still in Auschwitz. And those words just like, wow. And then he said, the Gemara says there's a guy called Nochem Ish Gamzu. Whatever happened to him in his life, he used to say, Gamzu Lataiva. He paused, and a lot of people said, Gamzu Lataiva. He said, you know how you read that Gemara? Gamzu Lataiva! I'm going to make this good. And he turned around to his audience and 300 Jews, and he said, you haven't suffered. You haven't lived. You haven't suffered. You're nothing. Because how else are you going to help other people when they suffer? Blown away. So bad things happening doesn't necessarily mean that it's ultimately a bad thing, but certainly at the time we don't see the reason, you don't see the reason it hurts. But next week we'll get into exactly reasons and whys and what to do about when bad things happen. At least I hope so, because I'll just be getting off the plane from London. But I will see you next week, and hopefully I won't be as tired as I am tonight.